Hello everybody. Today we are going to be reading the first chapter of Bearwalker, and the first chapter is called Pioneer Junior High, so hope you enjoy it. I hate the name of my school, almost as much as I hate the fact that I'm the shortest kid in 8th grade. There are even 6th graders taller than me, but I am not small enough to be forgotten by at least one person as I slouch in my corner desk with my head down. Baron, Mr. Wilbur says from the door of the classroom. Come on buddy, let's go. Everybody else is outside. So much for my wonderful idea. I should have known it was too good to be true when the principal announced over the PA that any student who was not outside promptly at 9 a.m. and lined up for the bus would be left behind. I shoulder my backpack and I go out the front door of the school. I'm mad that my idea about getting out of this special experience hasn't worked. I don't notice that Mr. Wilbur has turned back to get something and is not behind me. Mistake number one. Mistake number two is walking out in the blinding sunlight without noticing what a gang of 3 boys is hanging around the door. The 3 main reasons I am dreading the days ahead. Oops, says a familiar voice, just before a leg hits my shin and just the right place to send me sprawling onto my face. My hands scrape the pavement, but at least I don't hit my face and get a bloody nose like I did the first time this happened to me. One thing I've learned in my time in junior high is that I learned how to fall down. I look up over my shoulder at the big round face of Asa Denham. His long blonde hair is like a halo lit by the sun around his head, but his amused expression is not that of an attentive angel. His 2 buddies who hang around him like the other 2/3 of a set of Siamese triplets look over each of his shoulders. Ernie Crimmins and Harl Clark look just as self-satisfied as their leader. I don't know which one of the 3 tripped me, but they're all enjoying the spectacle of me flattened on the sidewalk like roadkill. Sorry, Asa says. Yeah, Ernie agrees. You're such a clumsy little shrimp. Shrimp, Carl repeats. His imagination is limited. Not surprising, seeing as how down prey always attacks the pack. Other kids have quickly gathered around. Fight, someone says in a hopeful voice, as if I were about to get up, just to get even more convincingly flattened. Yo, a foghorn tone shoots in. What happened to Baron? He trip over an ant? It's Willie Donner, of course. Willie is a weird match for that big voice of his. He's as skinny as I am short, but he's always quick with his sarcasm so that no one ever gets a chance to make a crack about him before he makes some biting remark of his own. Someone pushes his way in front, takes my arm, and lifts me up. Come on, Baron, he says. It takes me a moment to realize who it is. I've been expecting a teacher to be the one that steps in, but it's not. It's Cody Campbell. Cody is not just one of the biggest, he's also the best looking guy in 8th grade, sort of a teenage Brad Pitt. The girls swoon over him, and it's because he's the best football player in school. The guys all respect him too. Asa and his crew have already taken a few steps backward to disappear into the crowd. I'm still trying to get over my shock about Cody actually noticing me, much less lending me a helping hand when I hear the AP's brusque voice. Move aside, he snaps, as if he actually had something for the crowd to part before him like the waters of the Red Sea. No one ever wants to get on the wrong side of Assistant Principal Stark. He stares down at me as if trying to identify some lower form of life that just crawled out from under a rock. What's going on here, Mr. Braun? He says. Did I hear someone say fight? Has someone been picking on you? His hooded eyes take in the scrapes on my hands before I can even put them behind my back. ZTP, I think. ZTP. ZTP stands for Zero Tolerance Policy in effect at our school when it comes to fights. Anyone involved, including the hapless victim, get punished. All I have to do is mention Asa's name and we'll both be up the creek. In detention, probably denied the opportunity to go on the class trip. I'm tempted. But what works against my temptation is the ancient junior high code omerta. Nobody squeals on nobody, no matter what. I tripped, I say. Mr. Campbell here has just helped me up. Humph, he snorts. He turns on his heels and strides back into the building. Cody slaps me once on the chest, a friendly slap that confuses me. It's as if I've done something admirable. You never cried, do you? Someone else has come up to me. Someone else has come up next to me. It must be the Indian boy's day for having white kids sneak up on him. It's a girl this time. Her name is Tara, and her desk is next to mine. She hands me a tissue. Your hand is bleeding, she says. Instead of saying anything, I just press the tissue into the scrape on my hand and walk away from both of them. As the class lines up for the bus, I look back at the red brick buildings of the school. Could it really be 6 months since my Uncle Jules dropped me off here for the first time? He had volunteered that first day to pick me up from the trailer park and take me to school because Grandma Kateri couldn't drive. I was in a bad mood, and Uncle Jules was good at picking up that vibe. Unlike some adults, he didn't think the right thing to do was to tell me it was all going to work out for the best. He knew as well as I did that things didn't always work out that way. My mom might get blown up in an unarmored Humvee on the road to the Baghdad airport, or just vanish like my dad did in Afghanistan 2 years ago. Uncle Jules has been a Marine himself back in World War II. Ours is a military family. Ancestors of mine have fought as U.S. soldiers, preferably Marines, in every American war from the Revolution all the way up to present day, always as volunteers, always in the front lines. There are more Purple Hearts in my family than tree branches. I'm proud of that, but pride didn't make me any less depressed that day. I was upset about my mom going away again and having to farm me out with Grandma Kateri. Not that I dislike my grandmother, she's great, but she's not my mom, and where my mom was going, I might not ever see her again. To be honest, I was also upset about what I knew I was heading into. A whole new school where I'd have to make new friends, if I was lucky, which was unlikely, and avoid being stereotyped as a Native American midget, which is probably also inevitable. So I was struggling between my feelings for being worried about my mom and feeling sorry for myself, and being angry at her for deserting me and being angry at myself for being so selfish. Although I tried not to show it, my face probably looked like a battlefield that day. A year is plenty of time to fit in, right? Like a square peg going to fit in a round hole if you just give it time. You could say that when I arrived here in the middle of my 7th grade year, I settled into a well-defined niche that was purely my own and remained so in 8th grade. The niche of a minuscule, mouthy Mohawk misfit. And nothing is going to change that. Not even a trip to an Adirondack camp. No matter how much my teacher, Mr. Wilbur, tries to pump up this as a great adventure. To be fair, Mr. Wilbur is a good guy. He's the first male teacher, aside from the phys ed teacher, that I've ever had, and he loves books. He's in the school library just as much as I am, and not just because he and our librarian, Miss Mars, are friends. Miss Mars is your typical dedicated school librarian. She's always suggesting books like a literary marriage broker, wedding readers to the titles just right for them. She makes me a special effort for the kids who are, and she says this with a little significant pause before the word readers, which describes me. When I was in elementary school at the Alkanasi Mohawk School and stepped into the school library for the first time, I was the kid who said in a too loud voice, "I'm going to read every book in here." That earned me a hug from Miss Smoke, the first librarian I ever fell in love with. It also earned me a beating from Billy Jacobs and Timothy laughing after school. Even in an Indian school with other Indian kids, if you're little and call too much attention to yourself, you attract the bullies. At Pioneer, the first book Miss Mars handed me was Freak the Mighty, which was okay. I liked the story and the way it was written, but I thought her motivation in suggesting it to me was a little transparent. When I brought it back to her and she asked me what I thought of, I said I sort of wised off. It was okay, I shrugged. What do you got for me now, the biography of Tom Thumb? Her face got red. Then she turned around and walked away from the desk. I'll be back, she said. I felt bad as I stood there, but I still thought I'd made my point. If I were the only African-American kid in class, would she have recommended up from slavery to me? She headed for Mr. Wilbur. The two of them put their heads together and did some whispering. Then she went back to the shelf and pulled out a book. When she came back, she was no longer on the verge of tears, and what she had in her hands was something really special. I have this thing about bears. It's not just that I'm a Mohawk Indian and I belong to a bear clan. It goes way beyond that. I've had a lifelong fascination with bears. Their gentleness and their strength has always touched me, touched something deep inside me. My mom said my first word was bear, and I had a stuffed one that I named Buddy. I carried Buddy with me everywhere, which wasn't always that easy on him. Mom patched him up a million times until he finally completely fell apart when I was 5. Then my mom and dad and I had a funeral for him just like he was a person. I can't get enough of bears. I'm always reading about them. I draw pictures of them on my notebooks. I even have a bear paw design sort of tattooed into my left arm. I did it with a sharp pencil, poking it in and drawing blood with each stab. I don't recommend you trying that, seeing as how I got an infection that ended up making my arm swell up like a balloon and I had a fever for 2 days. Here, said Miss Mars, holding out the book over so that I could see the design on the cover. I snatched the book so fast, like a grizzly grabbing a piece of raw meat, that I almost took Miss Mars's fingers with it. I don't even recall walking out of the library. There was just me and the book. The rest of that day, I spent every spare second and most of math class reading it. The Sacred Paw, The Bear in Nature, Myth and Literature. I brought it back to the library the next day. Miss Mars looked really surprised when I walked up to her desk. "Returning it already?" she said. I shook my head. "Can I buy it?" I asked. I couldn't, of course, but Miss Mars got on the internet and helped me locate a used copy on eBay for $4. When we completed the transaction, I grinned up at her. "This," I said, "could be the start of a beautiful friendship." Mr. Wilbur also has picked up on my ursophilic fascination. One of the reasons I like him is because he lets me get away with a lot. I don't mean stuff like throwing spitballs or making rude hand gestures when his back is turned. Those things are adequately covered by Asa and his crew. I mean that he lets me just turn about every writing assignment into a treatise on bears. Like when we were doing poetry, I used a poem from The Sacred Paw about the heavy bear who goes with me. Mr. Wilbur was amused that in my critique I talked about how using bears as metaphors would work better if the poet knew something about real bears. When we did Shakespeare, I wrote 3 whole pages on the stage direction, "Exit, pursued by a bear." Mr. Wilson even aids and abets. Just last week he loaned me a book I hadn't seen before, Touching Spirit Bear. It's about how old-style American Indian circle justice was used on a non-native kid who'd done a lot of bad stuff. Instead of sending him off to juvie jail, they exiled him onto an island. There he ran into you-know-what. Eventually, after a lot of hard lessons, that kid learned to listen to his heart, and I read the book in one sitting, reading it again, and then returned it to him. "You like it?" he said, smiling. He saw the look on my face. "You bet," I replied. "Think we could arrange for Asa and his crew to get sent to that island?" "Well," he said, rubbing his chin like he was actually considering it, "maybe not an island, but there is one way we'll be getting everyone outdoors this year." Mr. Wilbur loves the outdoors. He's always saying things like, "We need to attune our senses to the rhythms of the nature's cycles." And his favorite word seems to be listen. He'll just stop in the middle of a lecture and say that. "Listen." Then we're all supposed to get quiet and listen. And some of us do eventually hear what it is he wants us to notice, like maybe a cardinal calling from a branch just outside the open window of the classroom. He's taken courses on things like animal tracking, making fire with a bow drill, building survival shelters in the forest. Now, my being an Indian, you might imagine I would know about all that stuff. But most Indian kids, even those on the res, are not learning those things anymore. They're too busy doing all the things other kids do, watching DVDs, playing Xbox games, downloading rap music on their iPods. All that I knew about animal tracking was what I had read in books. And the only real bears I've ever been close to are the ones I saw in the Syracuse Zoo. My mom drove 6 hours to take me there the week before she got shipped out. I didn't want to see the elephants or the snakes or anything else. We spent the whole time with the bears. Most people just walked past because the bears weren't doing anything except lying there. But I didn't care. I just wanted to be close to them and feel their presence. I felt as if I were in there with them, looking out of their eyes, sharing their thoughts. My mom only suggested moving on once. When I didn't answer, she sat down and put her arm around me. We stayed until one of the zoo people came in and said we had to leave. "So soon?" I said. "Son," the man said in a big gentle voice, "was up to me, I'd let you stay all night. But we got rules here and we done bent them already. It's an hour past closing time." But he didn't make us get up and go just yet. Instead, he sat down and talked with me about the bears, how he liked taking care of them, though he'd rather see them out in the wild since there's always so much going on in a bear's head and life that had to be awful boring for them in their enclosure. That's why he gave them balls to play with and hid their food so they had to spend time figuring out where it was. It was dark out when he finally led us to the back gate and let us out. Before we left, though, he tapped me on the shoulder. "You might want this," he said. He was holding a wooden carving of a bear. It was about the most beautiful, perfect little thing I'd ever seen. Not a cartoony bear, but like a real animal shrunk down, every detail just right. "I can keep it?" I said as he placed it in my outstretched palm. "Well, maybe it can keep you," he said with a big grin. "Bears bring you luck, you know." "Thank you, Roy," my mother said. Our car was the only one left in the lot. It didn't hit me until Mom pressed the button on her keychain to open the doors. "Roy?" I asked. "He served with your dad in Afghanistan," my mother said. Her voice was so soft I barely heard it. I didn't say anything after that. I just kept my hand in my back jacket pocket, holding on tight to that little bear. We pulled out onto the road, and I guess I fell asleep because then I didn't wake up until hours later when my mother opened the door to reach in and slide her arms under me. She hadn't picked me up like that since I was in 2nd grade, and I suppose I might have protested that Mom doesn't just carry her 7th grade son, but even if he is still only knee-high to a gopher. But I didn't. I just leaned my head against her shoulder and fell into her strong arms, strong enough to carry the whole world, holding me safe and secure as she took me up to bed. That year ago drive to Syracuse with my mom was the last trip I really wanted to take until now. And now, whether or not I wanted to, I'm about to get on this bus for the annual 8th grade trip to Camp Chuckamuck. 4 nights in a wilderness camp to do some of those same things that Mr. Wilbur learned. I sigh as I climb the steps. Maybe I'll really like it after all. I mean, how bad could it be? All I have to worry about is more of the usual junior high bullying that I've been suffering for the last 6 months. It's not like my life is going to be in danger. And that's chapter 1. I hope you enjoyed it.